I had considered starting this session off, or this talk off, with the iconic guitar riffs of Black Sabbath playing, got Dr. Gilmour there, playing Iron Man, as we all chanted in unison, we are Iron Weed. But I'm not tech savvy enough or cool enough to pull that one off. But I do really want to emphasize this close connection between Providence, our Otterburn campus, and this endangered species. Common name, facilitated or Western ironweed, scientific name Vernonian fasciculata, is considered endangered by both the Federal Species at Risk Act and the Manitoba Provincial's Endangered Species and Ecosystem Act. And under these acts, it's not just illegal to, pick these flowers or harm the individual plants of the species, but you can't disturb, destroy, disrupt, mess up, I want to use other adjectives, but I can't, the habitat of this endangered species. It's a pretty flower, pink. You might recognize those leaves. It kind of looks like an aster, because it is. If we look at its range in North America, well, it's a range, it's native range in the world. We see that southern Manitoba is the most northern extent of its range. And maybe you see that tiny little circle there in Riderville. But that tiny little circle once had ironweed, no longer does. In fact, if we go into the literature, we can see that we only ever have had 4 documented subpopulations of ironweed in Canada. And, of these 4, 2, the one near Low Farm and the one here along the Rat River, are the only extant ones, the only ones we have left. And, thanks, Dr. Dale Snyder, for your presentation on women in STEM. This is pretty cool. 1959, this document was published by a really prominent botanist. I'm going to say she's a botanist first, and then a woman, a woman scientist, but we recognize her as a really predominant botanist in the area. Really amazing history. But let's take a look at these subpopulations. Weyburn, done, extirpated, means that the ironweed is no longer found in that area. Morris, Manitoba, extirpated. We haven't seen it there since 1953. Low Farm, probably gone as well, although this most recent publication still lists it there as extant. But wow, I look over there and see Otterburn. I see Providence sitting around there. And a pretty good chunk of the location of this endangered species is right here on our campus. So we thought about doing some investigation, seeing how the last time a survey was done on ironweed was 5 years ago, 2019. So the objectives of this work was first to go on a reconnaissance on campus and a few sites off campus, just to say whether we can see ironweed or not. So I've got a bunch of students there. One of them is Annabea, I think. And looking for ironweed on our campus, present, not present, and then a few sites off campus. And then if objective number 1 showed that we still had ironweed here, maybe we could begin to characterize what our on-campus subpopulation of this plant looks like. So it's a bunch of little yellow dots there, probably hard to read the font, but this reconnaissance included our campus, a little east of our campus, as well as places like the Rat River near St. Pierre-Jolie that have had reports in the past of ironweed, the Low Farm site, and a bunch of other places that I like to visit. And I kept my eye open, including the LaSalle, the Pembina, the Marais, a bunch of drainage ditches. So these are places where it looks like the Rat River around here. And so you'd ask yourself, if we have it here on campus, do you think we have it elsewhere? Well, the results of this reconnaissance showed us that, along the reaches of the Rat River that run through our campus, we saw it, present, yes. kind of like take attendance on Populi, right? Present. Rat River east of Providence, present. It made sense. We canoed down a little bit. That's the great thing, right, about these prairie rivers and streams. You can access areas in the summertime or in the open water season on canoe. You don't have to ask land owners for permission. And in the wintertime, you can access these areas when it's frozen. Anyway, exciting stuff. But if I look at these other places like St. Pierre Joly, absent. Low Farm, absent. All the other places, absent. And for the most part, this matches up with the intensive surveys that the province has also conducted in their search for ironweed. So that kicks us into that second objective. Can we characterize our on-campus subpopulation of this ironweed? For the most part, we looked at most of the campus, well, at least most of the campus that is along the shoreline of the Rat River. And here's where students from field methods class helped out. And our method that we used, we didn't have a fancy boat. We're not the federal government, right, Anbea? But we had things like a measuring line, and we stretched this measuring line out 10 meters long. And along that line, we would look towards the river and upslope and estimate, count how many stems of ironweed we could see. And in this picture, I don't know if I have a little laser pointer. Oh yeah, I do. So, this is ironweed. We got a lot of ironweed along there. So we counted. We also recorded things like how far from the river did we see the plants, what was the dominant vegetation, and whether or not these areas were inundated, were they flooded or not. Results from this study, at least the ones I'm showing you today, showed us that 93% of those survey units had ironweed in them. So, perhaps that term weed applies here. It's pretty prevalent, at least on our campus. So we got some more data to kind of look through, but that's pretty incredible. What are some next steps? Well, we got this theme, what is so good about this good news? I think I heard this going around. So maybe we could ask, what is so good about this good or great ironweed habitat? What is it that makes, I canoe down, we canoe down here, we go other places, other prairie rivers and streams. It looks pretty similar, but what is so special about the Rat River along within Providence's Otterburn campus that makes it so appealing? And so to do this, we're going to canoe downstream, upstream, until we get to those last points of where we see the ironweed. Hopefully we hit the Red River. That'd be great if we saw it all the way to the Red River. But we don't see it, at least from this past study, we don't see it in St. Pierre, Joly. So somewhere along the lines, it's ending. Okay. Another next step in trying to figure this out is looking at this relationship between ironweed and flooding and inundation. So here, you guys remember all that rain we got in the fall? I can't remember, September or so. Really flooded up the river. If you wanted to go canoeing in the river, that would have been a great time to go. And if I look at this picture, I can see that's all ironweed. Well, most of it. All this stuff here is ironweed. And so there's probably this relationship. If we'd go and look at the precipitation records over the years, maybe going forward, maybe when we have high water levels, perhaps that's somehow favoring ironweed. How? Probably has to do with its rhizomatous growth ability. So it can spread by seeds, or it can spread asexually through rhizomes. And that gives it an advantage maybe in spring times that are experiencing like high water levels in these areas. So something as a next step. Other next steps. Okay, so it's unlawful to pick and harm these things and their habitat, but wouldn't it be great if we could take that a step further and say, what can we do to enhance the habitat? And there's probably money to help these initiatives, probably some federal and provincial money. So one of the ways we could enhance that habitat is to take a look at places where we don't see this plant growing and figure out why is that the case. Well, one of the things that might be preventing it is this invasive plant called reed canary grass. And a couple of Prov talks ago, we did this thing on reed canary grass. So maybe you can go back in the archives or figure out. It's really prevalent. Look at that. That's the only thing I can see. I see the measuring line, but that would have been a really easy section to count. 0, absent, not there. And a lot of our sites, 32% of our study units had this reed canary grass. A great visual here from Google Earth 2022. Where's my cursor? Okay, so this whole area here, pretty much, that's almost 100 feet. What are my units there? 100 meters, actually. It's probably all reed canary grass and no ironweed. If we go to places like St. Pierre, I took this picture in St. Pierre, that's all I see is this invasive plant, reed canary grass. Get it out of there. If you get it out of there, perhaps the endangered ironweed comes about. Okay, so developing some kind of strategy. And then the last, these are supposed to be points to ponder. But I'll leave you this points to ponder. We could maybe start promoting province's ironweed habitat. We arguably have probably almost all of the ironweed in Canada right here on our campus. We can look at actual stem counts. So, recently, I think we had this unveiling of our new mascot. We know the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are in the Grey Cup. They got 2 mascots. Why not another mascot? I kind of like P for Providence, and we could call him or her Vern. Anyway, but I think there's something to be said about our habitat that we have here. Anyway, thank you to people from that class. Thank you to Andy for letting us use his canoe, and St. Pierre for letting us access their sites. Anyways, that's all I got.